Greetings, friends. My name is Timothy O'Leary, and I'm coming to you live from my bedroom in Washington, D.C., because I'm still only half vaccinated and therefore still in lockdown. I, I moved to D.C. with my family almost 3 years ago when I became general director of Washington National Opera at the Kennedy Center. But the story I'd like to tell you starts in the year 2010, when I had a lunch appointment at Duff's Restaurant in St. Louis with a person I'd never met, but who would soon change my life and who would, in my view, along with so many others, help change the community of St. Louis for the better. The lunch was with Batya Abramson Goldstein, who was at the time the executive director of the Jewish Community Relations Council in St. Louis. I was then the general director of Opera Theater of St. Louis. 2 years earlier, in 2008, my colleagues and I decided that we would mount the first production of John Adams' The Death of Klinghoffer in the United States since the original production in 1991. The opera is about the 1985 hijacking of the Achille Lauro cruise liner by Palestinian terrorists and the murder by those terrorists of Leon Klinghoffer, a wheelchair-bound American Jew who was traveling with his wife to celebrate their anniversary. It's a story of incomprehensible inhumanity and violence against an innocent person, dealing with some of the most sensitive issues in contemporary life: extremism, hate, terrorism. And yet, at the same time, it is a work that asserts the common humanity of ordinary people of all faiths, races, and nationalities. It is a challenging work, and the decision to produce it was not easy. But my colleagues and I decided to do it out of a belief in the arts as a force for connection and for understanding. Working with members of our board and community, we therefore outlined an idealistic plan to foster needed dialogue surrounding a controversial work of art. That was in 2008, and the opera was planned for 2011. At that distance, this seemed like an exciting, challenging, wonderful project. Now, in the winter of 2010, it became time to put this plan into action. At this point, I became terrified. How would we do this? We had moments of considering an alternate strategy, the chickening out strategy. Maybe we should just do nothing, just put the opera on and say that a work of art speaks for itself and hope for the best. Luckily, Batya, though, agreed to meet me for lunch. I told her about The Death of Klinghoffer and my rather naive, vague idea about how the production, which had a history of being especially controversial in the Jewish community, could foster dialogue. I told her how in need of help we were if this notion had a chance to succeed. The fact that it did succeed has all to do with what happened next. Batya thought about it. I'll never forget watching her think about it. Getting involved in this project in any way was a risk for her and for the organization that she was responsible for leading. A risk that she easily could have said, no thank you, but I've got a lot on my plate. Batya, though, as she has done throughout her impactful career, decided to see if something could be done. Not long afterward, I found myself at another lunch, this time at Batya's invitation. That year, the Jewish Community Relations Council annual luncheon honored Dr. Ghazala Hyatt, who was past chair of the Islamic Foundation of Greater St. Louis. Dr. Hyatt spoke about the work she has done in building interfaith understanding. Her message was that while we cannot pretend that ordinary citizens in St. Louis can solve the problems of the whole world, we can do something powerful where we live, which is to get to know one another across our traditional differences and divides, and to build community. And that if we do that successfully, this cannot help but to have a positive effect, however gradually, on the whole world. Dr. Hyatt got involved, as well as the relatively newly formed Michael and Barbara Newmark Institute for Human Relations, and a committee of leaders from Christian, Jewish, and Muslim organizations was formed, as well as a spectrum of other civic leaders who helped advise us. The amount of Batya's time and her passion and wisdom and her own credibility that she invested is still astonishing to me. One of her ideas was to involve a group of local high school students, a group called JAM, which stands for Jews and Muslims. Through a partnership with the St. Louis Art Museum, the teens studied works of visual art born from violence and discussed their implications before attending the opera and doing the same. When we had a post-show dialogue session with our audience, it was recent JAM alumni who moderated the talk, one Jewish and one Muslim, and audience members shared stories that spanned the sweep of generations, from escaping the Holocaust to experiences of bias in St. Louis. Something happens in these contexts when people engage in painful topics or areas of significant disagreement through the prism of artistic works. Somehow, people become, I believe, the best versions of themselves, willing to listen, to empathize, and to reconsider what they think. When we held a panel with faith leaders moderated by Professor Gerald Early of Washington University, the St. Louis Post-Dispatch ran a story on the front page. Most of the time, when an opera company is the subject of a front page story in the newspaper, it's because the company is going bankrupt. But in this case, the first sentence read, quote, "In other cities, outrage at the death of Klinghoffer has caused picketing, controversy, and sometimes canceled performances. In St. Louis, where the opera is receiving its first production in 20 years, it has caused an outbreak of interfaith understanding and civility." A couple of months after the opera closed, Batya called me, letting me know that her colleagues on the Interfaith Partnership were interested in organizing a commemoration of the 10th anniversary of September 11th, and they were considering making it an interfaith musical event. She asked if I would be willing to help. Would I be willing to help? Thanks to Paul Reuter, the Interfaith Commemoration in Music was held in St. Louis's Sheldon Concert Hall. At the finale, the famed opera singer Christine Brewer, who's also a St. Louisan, sang "God Bless America," together with everyone who had just performed the concert: St. Louis police and firefighters, the In Unison Gospel Choir, string players from the St. Louis Symphony, a choir of Hindu chanters, an ensemble of Sikh singers with harmonium and drums, Muslim mothers and children, a Jewish cantor, the choir of Christ Church Cathedral, and members of the St. Louis Chamber Chorus. When we started working on this project, we all thought it would be a one-time event to mark 10 years since September 11th. A show of unity across the St. Louis community. As soon as it was over, we all agreed that we had to do it the next year. And so slowly, an organization began to form, Arts and Faith St. Louis. In 2014, the September concert came only about a month after Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson. And in addition to the program that year was made, the choir from Normandy High School, the high school from which Michael Brown had just graduated, performed in the slot right before God Bless America. They sang Seasons of Love from the musical Rent. A few weeks later, we went one step further. Thanks to my friend Jean Dobbs Bradford, who runs Jazz St. Louis, Opera Theater of St. Louis joined a host of community organizations, including Jazz St. Louis, the Urban League Young Professionals, Arts and Faith St. Louis, the Sheldon, St. Louis Public Radio, and the Normandy School District. All of those groups co-produced an extraordinary concert, this time at Normandy High School. Acclaimed professional artists and non-professionals from the community came together. This time, not only Christine Brewer, but Denise Graves sang, each together with the Normandy High School Choir, amidst a program that included gospel choirs, jazz, blues, Broadway, cabaret, and opera. At the end, the whole crowd sang Amazing Grace together. Included in the program was a song that Denise Graves had sung for presidential inaugurations, American Anthem by Gene Shear. It's a song that acknowledges the serious imperfections and injustices of our country and voices determination to work to correct them. Hearing Denise sing in that auditorium was one of the most memorable performances I've ever heard. And this year, our new president quoted the lyrics in his inaugural address. The work and prayers of centuries have brought us to this day. What shall be our legacy? What will our children say? Let them say of me, I was one who believed in sharing the blessings I received. Let me know in my heart when my days are through, America, I gave my best to you. Over the past year of physical distance from each other, I have deeply missed the experience I've had so many times. Feeling crowds of people in the same physical space, deeply moved by the strange power of music. And people are not just moved as individuals, but pulled together. At a live musical event, when the connection between the stage and the crowd is electric, the audience becomes like a single organism, breathing and responding together. There are moments of this kind of shared experience of art that defy description. We often use the word inspiring, which means literally to be filled with divine spirit. Author Elizabeth Gilbert gives us a talk on this subject in which she describes that moment when a performer seems no longer to be merely human, but, quote, lit from within, lit from below, and all lit up with divinity. That concert at Normandy High School was now 7 years ago. That isn't such a terribly long time in some ways, but it has been a period that has left us in a new world. It was before Charlottesville and before the killings of Tamir Rice, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd, before the pandemic and before the insurrection at the US Capitol. Do I still believe in this idea that by singing together across painful differences, we can do any good? I've asked myself that question a lot. And one thing I know is that the arts are not enough, but the arts do have a role to play. The arts are how we decide collectively which stories get told, by whom, and how. As it happens, when we had to shut down the Kennedy Center on March 12th of 2020, we were in final dress rehearsals for another opera that touches on the most sensitive topics of our time, an opera called Blue, that tells the story of a Black police officer in Harlem who loses his 16-year-old son to a shooting by a fellow officer who was white. In the months before the production, the Washington National Opera had worked with a coalition of local and national partners, the law enforcement community, public policy, the faith community, youth development, social justice, community foundations, and other stakeholders to collaborate on events designed to foster dialogue about the artistic event. March 12th, the same day we had to close the Kennedy Center, I attended the culminating performance of one of these programs called Listen Up, based on the work of an artist named Xiaopeng Liu, who creates a methodology in Boston for police officers and community members who are victims of violence to work in direct artistic collaboration. In DC, our program brought together 8 BIPOC teenagers who wrote original songs and spoken word pieces together with police officers who are musicians. The songs were on the themes of hope and fear, and it was an absolutely extraordinary, hopeful, and moving event. We've all been finding ways to connect by Zoom, and some of these new ways are hugely valuable. But the ancient technology of gathering together in person, to put our hopes and fears into music and therefore to hear them across our differences, this is the technology that in the end I do not believe can be improved upon. I only wish we were together in person today, and I look forward to the day that we will be again. Victor Hugo, in my view, said it well when he said, "Music expresses that which cannot be said, and on which it is impossible to be silent." I do still believe that music is the sound of what is best in us, and that it is the job of artists to make sure it is heard. Thank you.